For more than 3 decades, the world has known Brad Pitt as one of Hollywood's biggest stars, an Academy Award winner, a global icon, a man whose face has appeared on countless magazine covers, and whose performances have defined generations of cinema. Millions have followed his career, his relationships, his triumphs, and his setbacks. But behind every red carpet, behind every blockbuster, and beyond every headline, there was another role Brad Pitt once described as the most meaningful of his life. Being a father. For nearly 20 years, he helped raise 6 children in one of the most famous families on Earth. Their lives unfolded under an almost constant spotlight. Every family vacation became breaking news. Every public appearance was photographed. Every private moment seemed to become a public story. Yet despite the endless attention, very few people ever saw what family life actually meant to Brad Pitt. Who was he when the cameras were gone? What kind of father did he hope to be? How did fatherhood change one of Hollywood's most recognizable men? And what happened when the life he had carefully built faced its greatest challenge? This is not a story about tabloid rumors. It is not a story about choosing sides. It is the story of a man whose greatest role may never have appeared on a movie screen. A story told through public interviews, verified reporting, and the moments that reveal a quieter side of a life lived in extraordinary circumstances. Because sometimes, the most important stories are the ones that happen after the cameras stop rolling. Long before he became a father, Brad Pitt was living the dream that millions of aspiring actors could only imagine. By the early 2000s, he had become one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces. Films like Legends of the Fall, C7N, Fight Club, Ocean's 11, and Troy had made him an international superstar. Awards followed. Critical acclaim followed. Success seemed limitless. But behind that extraordinary career, Brad would later admit that something was still missing. In several interviews over the years, he reflected on a period in his life when professional success alone no longer felt enough. He began searching for something more meaningful than fame. That search would eventually lead him to the role that changed everything: fatherhood. In 2004, while filming Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie formed a close friendship that would eventually grow into one of Hollywood's most talked-about relationships. At that time, Angelina was already a devoted mother. She had adopted Maddox from Cambodia in 2002. Then in 2005, she welcomed Zahara into the family through adoption from Ethiopia. Brad's relationship with the children developed naturally. Public photographs from that period often showed him spending time with Maddox and Zahara during family outings, vacations, and everyday moments. People close to the family later described how easily he embraced their responsibilities of fatherhood. It wasn't simply about joining Angelina's life. It was about becoming part of a family that was already taking shape. In early 2006, Brad officially adopted both Maddox and Zahara. Their surnames were legally changed to Jolie Pitt. It was more than a legal process. It was a public declaration of commitment. From that moment forward, Brad was just Angelina's partner. He was the father of 2 children whose lives would forever be connected to his own. Later that same year, the family welcomed Shiloh Jolie into the world. For the first time, Brad experienced the birth of his biological child. Media attention was overwhelming. Photographers followed every movement. News helicopters circled hospitals. Magazines competed fiercely for the first family photographs. But Brad and Angelina chose a different path. Rather than allowing unauthorized paparazzi images to dominate the story, they sold the first official photographs of Shiloh and donated the proceeds to charities supporting children around the world. It was an early example of something that would define many of their public decisions as parents. Whenever possible, they tried to turn extraordinary attention into something meaningful. As the years passed, the family continued to grow. Pax joined the Jolie Pitt family through adoption from Vietnam in 2007. Then in 2008, twins Knox Leon and Vivienne Marcheline were born. Almost overnight, Brad Pitt found himself raising 6 children. 6 different personalities. 6 unique stories. 6 lives depending on him. Years later, Brad would openly speak about how dramatically fatherhood changed his priorities. In interviews promoting films such as The Tree of Life and Moneyball, he described becoming a father as one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. He spoke about learning patience, learning responsibility, and discovering a deeper sense of purpose beyond his career. He once explained that his children had forced him to become a better version of himself. Not because they expected perfection, but because they deserved his best. Friends and colleagues noticed changes as well. The actor, once known for constantly moving from one project to another, became more selective about the roles he accepted. Family schedules increasingly influenced filming decisions. Whenever possible, he wanted to spend time at home, travel with the children, or bring them along when work required long periods away. Although the Jolie Pitt family lived a life unlike most families, Brad often tried to create moments that felt surprisingly ordinary. Helping with homework, sharing meals, celebrating birthdays, watching movies together. Simple routines that many parents would recognize. In interviews, he often suggested that these quiet moments meant far more to him than glamorous premieres or award ceremonies. Because inside the walls of their home, he was one of the world's biggest movie stars. He was simply Dad. For a time, it seemed that Brad had found the balance he had always been searching for. A thriving career, a growing family, and a future filled with possibility. But raising 6 children under the constant attention of the world's media was never going to be simple. As the children grew older, the challenges of protecting their privacy, supporting their individual dreams, and keeping the family grounded became more difficult than anyone outside the spotlight could truly imagine. And that was when Brad discovered that being a father wasn't about grand moments. It was about showing up, day after day, even when the world was watching. To the outside world, the Jolie Pitt family often looked like something out of a Hollywood movie. Private jets, movie premieres, international travel, photographers documenting nearly every public appearance. But behind those carefully captured images, Brad Pitt often described a very different reality. One filled with noise, laughter, unexpected chaos, and the everyday challenges that come with raising 6 children. As the family continued to grow, so did Brad's understanding of what fatherhood truly meant. He once admitted that becoming a parent completely changed the rhythm of his life. Before children, his schedule revolved around film productions. After children, everything revolved around the family calendar. School activities, doctor's appointments, birthdays, vacations, and making sure each child felt seen and supported. Despite their extraordinary lifestyle, Brad and Angelina tried to create a home where their children could experience as much normalcy as possible. They celebrated birthdays together, cooked meals as a family, watched movies at home, and encouraged the children to spend time outdoors rather than constantly living in front of cameras. Brad has spoken about how much he enjoyed the simple moments. Watching his children laugh together, seeing them discover new interests, listening to their endless questions about the world. Those ordinary moments, he believed, were the ones that truly mattered. One of the greatest challenges was raising 6 children who came from different backgrounds, different cultures, and different life experiences. Brad understood that there was no single parenting approach that would work for everyone. Each child needed something different. Maddox was naturally curious and thoughtful. Brad often encouraged his interest in learning about the world and supported his growing independence as he entered adulthood. Pax developed a quiet, creative personality. Rather than pushing him toward the spotlight, Brad and Angelina allowed him the freedom to explore photography, visual arts, and other creative interests behind the scenes. Zahara grew into a confident young woman with a passion for education and humanitarian causes. Brad frequently appeared alongside her during important family moments, showing his pride as she continued building her own future. Shiloh became known for her independent spirit from an early age. Instead of trying to shape her into someone else's expectations, Brad publicly expressed admiration for his children's individuality, believing they should have the freedom to become whoever they wanted to be. The youngest twins, Knox and Vivienne, brought an entirely different kind of energy into the family. Brad once joked in interviews that life at home was rarely quiet. There was always someone laughing, someone running through the house, someone asking questions, or someone creating a little bit of harmless chaos. And somehow, he loved every minute of it. Family trips became another important part of their lives, whether traveling for Angelina's humanitarian work, Brad's film projects, or simply spending time together. The children experienced the world in a way few families ever could. They visited different countries, learned about different cultures, and saw firsthand that life looked very different beyond Hollywood. Brad believed those experiences helped his children develop empathy and a broader understanding of the world. He often spoke about wanting them to appreciate people from every background, not because they were famous, but because compassion begins with understanding others. At home, Brad also encouraged creativity. Music, drawing, photography, architecture, design. The arts had always been an important part of his own life. He wanted his children to discover passions that belonged entirely to them, not because their parents were actors, but because creativity allows people to express who they truly are. Looking back, perhaps the most remarkable thing about the Jolie Pitt household was the fame. It was the diversity. 6 children, different personalities, different dreams, different stories. Yet Brad never spoke about trying to make them the same. Instead, he seemed to embrace the idea that every child deserved to grow into their own identity. For years, that philosophy helped create a home filled with curiosity, acceptance, and love. But even the strongest families face moments that test everything they believe. As the children entered their teenage years, new pressures began to emerge. The relentless attention of the media, the demands of 2 extraordinary careers, and personal struggles that would eventually change the family's future forever. The next chapter would become the most difficult of Brad Pitt's life. Not as an actor, but as a father. If there was one lesson Brad Pitt learned as a father, it was that no 2 children are ever the same. There was no parenting manual for raising 6 children. Especially 6 children with different personalities, different backgrounds, and different dreams. Brad understood that his role was to shape them into one image. It was to help each of them become the person they were meant to be. Over the years, he often spoke about how much he admired his children's individuality. Rather than expecting them to follow in his footsteps, he hoped they would find paths of their own. And one by one, they did. Maddox, the oldest, often appeared thoughtful beyond his years. As he grew older, he developed an interest in international affairs, science, and engineering. when he left for university in South Korea in 2019. Brad publicly described it as one of the proudest and most emotional moments of his life. Like many parents, he found it difficult to watch his eldest child leave home. But he also knew growing up means learning to let go. Pax preferred a quieter life. Unlike many celebrity children, he rarely sought public attention. Instead, he developed interests behind the camera: photography, digital art, creative storytelling. As he entered adulthood, Pax chose to express himself through art rather than fame. It was a reminder that not every child raised in Hollywood dreams of standing in front of the spotlight. Zahara found her own voice through education. As she prepared for college, Brad expressed pride in watching her grow into a confident and compassionate young woman. Her decision to attend Spelman College marked another important milestone. Not because of celebrity, but because it reflected her own ambitions and values. Then there was Shiloh. Perhaps no child in the family attracted more media attention while growing up. From an early age, every hairstyle, every outfit, every public appearance became the subject of headlines. But through it all, Brad consistently encouraged his children to be themselves. In interviews, he often spoke about respecting their individuality rather than trying to define it for them. As Shiloh grew older, she quietly focused on something she genuinely loved: dance. Videos shared publicly by respected dance studios revealed her commitment, her discipline, and the joy she found through movement. Not because anyone expected it, but because it was her choice. The youngest twins, Knox and Vivienne, experienced childhood a little differently. By the time they were born, their parents had already learned how difficult it was to raise children under constant public attention. Whenever possible, Brad and Angelina tried to keep the twins away from unnecessary media exposure. They appeared occasionally at family events, but much of their childhood remained private, giving them the opportunity to grow without the same level of public scrutiny their older siblings had experienced. Looking across all 6 children, one thing became clear: they were remarkably different from one another. Different interests, different personalities, different goals, and Brad seemed to view that as something to celebrate, not something to change. Fatherhood also changed the way he measured success. Earlier in his career, success had often meant opening weekend box office numbers, award nominations, or critical acclaim. But after becoming a father, his definition quietly evolved. In interviews, he suggested that the greatest reward was another successful film. It was watching his children become thoughtful, kind, independent people. That didn't mean parenting was easy. Like every father, Brad faced moments of uncertainty, moments of self-doubt, moments when work demanded his attention while family needed him at home. Balancing international film productions with the responsibilities of raising 6 children was never simple. Yet he continued trying to be present whenever he could, whether attending family milestones, traveling together, or simply spending time at home. Because the older his children became, the more he seemed to realize something important. Children don't remember every gift. They don't remember every vacation. They remember who was there, who listened, who encouraged them, who believed in them. For Brad, those quiet moments became far more valuable than any Hollywood premiere. But life has a way of testing even the strongest intentions. In 2016, everything changed. The family that had spent years growing together suddenly entered its most difficult chapter. And for Brad Pitt, the greatest challenge of fatherhood was only just beginning. No family, no matter how strong, no matter how loving, can avoid difficult seasons. For Brad Pitt, that season arrived in 2016. After more than a decade together, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie separated. Soon afterward, Angelina filed for divorce. The news spread around the world within hours. Television networks interrupted their programming. Newspapers filled their front pages. Entertainment websites published countless updates. For millions of people, it was the end of one of Hollywood's most famous relationships. But behind every headline, there was something far more important. 6 children. For Brad, the public story was never the hardest part. The private one was. Years later, he would openly admit that this period forced him to confront aspects of his life he could no longer ignore. In a widely discussed interview with GQ Style in 2017, Brad spoke candidly about his struggles. He acknowledged that he had stopped drinking alcohol. He described entering therapy. And he admitted that he needed to become more honest with himself than ever before. Rather than blaming others, he focused on taking responsibility for his own growth. He explained that becoming sober had given him greater clarity, not only as a person, but as a father. It was one of the most personal interviews of his career. For many people, it revealed a side of Brad Pitt rarely seen before. Not the confident movie star, not the Hollywood icon, but a man trying to rebuild his life, one day at a time. In the years that followed, the legal process surrounding the divorce continued. Much of it remained private. Some details became public through court filings and official statements. Others remained known only to those directly involved. Brad rarely spoke about the ongoing legal matters. Instead, when discussing his children, his comments remained measured and respectful. He understood something that many parents understand all too well. Children should never have to carry the weight of adult conflicts. As time passed, Brad appeared to shift more of his energy toward personal growth. He continued acting, expanded his work as a producer, explored architecture and design, rediscovered his passion for sculpture, and spoke openly about their importance of self-reflection. Friends and colleagues described him as someone focused on rebuilding his life with greater perspective. Fatherhood, he suggested, had taught him one lesson above all others. No parent is perfect. Every parent makes mistakes. What matters most is having the courage to learn from them. That message resonated with many people, because despite their extraordinary fame, Brad's experience reflected something deeply human. The realization that love alone doesn't solve every problem. That families sometimes face painful changes, and that healing takes time. By the early 2020s, his children were no longer small children. They were becoming young adults, building their own identities, making their own decisions, choosing their own futures. Like many parents, Brad had entered a new chapter, one where parenting looked less like giving directions, and more like offering support from the sidelines. Looking back, perhaps the greatest challenge Brad Pitt faced was never balancing Hollywood with family. It was learning that fatherhood doesn't end when children grow up. It simply changes. The conversations become different. Their responsibilities evolve. The hopes remain the same. You still want your children to be happy, to be safe, to become good people. And although much of that journey happened far from public view, it may ultimately become the role that shaped Brad Pitt more than any film ever could. Because when the cameras stop rolling, when their awards are placed on a shelf, and when the headlines eventually fade, a father's greatest hope is rarely to be remembered as a movie star. It is to know that somewhere, in the lives of his children, his love made a difference. For more than 30 years, the world has watched Brad Pitt through the lens of Hollywood. The premieres, The awards, the unforgettable performances, the headlines that followed nearly every chapter of his life. But fame has a way of creating a very incomplete picture. It captures moments, not the years between them. It records success, but rarely the quiet work of becoming a better person. For Brad Pitt, fatherhood became that quiet work, a journey that unfolded far away from movie sets, a journey filled with joy, responsibility, heartbreak, growth, and hope. Looking back over the years, one thing becomes clear. Becoming a father didn't simply add another role to Brad Pitt's life. It changed the way he viewed success itself. There was a time when success meant another acclaimed performance, another successful film, another award. But as his children grew, his priorities gradually shifted. In interviews, he often spoke about wanting to be present, to listen more, to learn more, and to become the kind of father his children could rely on. Like every parent, he discovered that raising children doesn't come with perfect answers. There are moments of confidence, and moments of doubt, moments of celebration, and moments of regret. No family escapes those experiences, not even one living under the brightest spotlight in the world. Perhaps one of Brad's most honest observations came when he admitted that becoming a parent forced him to keep growing as a person. Children have a way of holding up a mirror. They don't care about awards. They don't care about magazine covers. They don't see a celebrity. They simply see Dad. And that realization changed everything. As his children entered adulthood, Brad stepped into a new season of fatherhood, one that required something different. Less guidance, more trust, less protection, more acceptance, because every parent eventually reaches the same moment. The moment when your children begin writing their own stories. Maddox, Pax, Zahara, Shiloh, Knox, Vivienne, each has chosen a different path. Different dreams, different passions, different ways of seeing the world. Perhaps that's exactly what Brad always hoped for. Not 6 children living identical lives, but 6 individuals confident enough to become themselves. Today, many conversations about Brad Pitt still focus on his career, his relationships, or the public chapters of his life. Those stories will always be part of his legacy. But they are not the whole story. There is another legacy, one that cannot be measured by box office numbers, awards, or headlines. The legacy of trying to be a better father than you were yesterday. The legacy of continuing to learn, even after making mistakes. The legacy of understanding that love isn't measured by perfection, but by presence, by effort, and by the willingness to keep showing up. Perhaps that is why Brad has become increasingly private over the years. Not because he has nothing left to say, but because some of life's most meaningful accomplishments don't happen in front of cameras. They happen around a dinner table, during a quiet conversation, on an ordinary afternoon that no photographer will ever capture. Those are the moments children remember. Not the premieres, not the interviews, not their applause, just the feeling that someone was there. Someone believed in them. Someone loved them. In the end, history will remember Brad Pitt as one of Hollywood's greatest actors. His films will continue to inspire new generations. His performances will remain part of cinema for decades to come. But beyond the lights of Hollywood, beyond the red carpets, and beyond the headlines, there is another story. The story of a man who spent nearly 2 decades trying to balance extraordinary fame with one of life's most ordinary responsibilities. Being a father, whether that journey was perfect or imperfect, is ultimately not what makes it meaningful. What matters is that it was real. A reminder that behind every famous face, there is a human being still learning, still growing, and still hoping to leave something more valuable than success. Perhaps the greatest legacy any parent can leave behind is not a fortune, not fame, not even a famous name, but children who know they were loved. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications for more carefully researched stories about the people behind the headlines. And we'd love to hear from you. What do you think is the most important lesson about fatherhood in Brad Pitt's journey? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below.